Now, China continues to extend its influence in the Middle East, with state-owned entities said to be in talks to invest up to $10 billion in the Aramco IPO. Let's discuss this and other geopolitical issues with Anja Manuel, the author of This Brave New World and co-founder of consulting firm Rice Hadley Gates. Anja, great to have you with us. Of course, we continue to see the China-U.S. trade tensions, not to mention President Trump's putting Saudi Arabia as its centerpiece for its foreign policy. So how would a Chinese investment into the Aramco IPO play out?
Yes. Well, at this point, they're just talking about investment. I'm not sure it's been agreed, but I can't imagine that the Trump administration is terribly happy about it. China and Saudi Arabia have been getting much closer. I think China sent its largest ever delegation to the Saudi investment conference these past couple of weeks. There's a big trade deal, a big petrochemical complex, and I think that really complicates things for Washington, which is taking a tougher and tougher line on China.
What does it say about the Trump administration strategy in the Middle East, especially at a time when they were trying to rebuild ties after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi back in 2018?
Yeah, I do think the ties between Saudi Arabia and the government of Saudi Arabia and the United States government remain strong, especially on the security side. And of course, we in the U.S. can't tell our allies who else they should work with. And at some level, we're going to have to live with the Middle East having strong economic ties to China and elsewhere.
Anja, it feels like with the broader trade negotiations, it's one step forward and a couple of steps back and possibly, to the side as well. Every day seems to bring a new headline of greater uncertainty. Even if we do get this phase one deal signed, say by the end of the year, which seems now to be the timeline that we're looking at, is it going to be a meaningful agreement?
My personal view is that the U.S. government is in the process of climbing out of the hole it dug itself with the Phase 1 trade agreement. Lighthizer and Mnuchin have been working incredibly hard on this, but when you look at the few details that have come out, high farm purchases, that's fantastic, but the Chinese were purchasing a lot of our farm products before the trade war started, some IP protections, some opening of the financial sector. Most of what I see in the Phase 1 trade deal are things that the Chinese had committed to already, not new big structural reforms, which is what's really needed.
What's the feeling then amongst the U.S. business community? Is there still support for Trump's trade war, or is there just a desire for greater certainty regardless of what the outcome is at this point?
Yeah, the CEOs and business leaders I speak to are quite worried that their markets in China are disappearing, that the trade war, especially on the tech side, I'm here in Silicon Valley, that the decoupling of the supply chains is becoming more and more real, and they're looking for alternatives. They do broadly support the idea that China has been cheating, it has been mercantilist, and I would agree with most of the CEOs I talk to that actually what we need here is a unified front with the entire world pushing back against China's more mercantilist policies rather than the U.S. going it alone.
Talking about a unified front, how consistent has the Trump administration's approach towards Huawei and other Chinese tech firms been? Because we have seen now Secretary Ross saying that they will very shortly allow the selling of components to Huawei.
Yes, the Huawei issue is very complex. I do share the administration's concerns about having Huawei in 5G networks around the world. There is a real national security concern there. However, as you may remember, the U.S. added Huawei to the entity list back in May of this year, and that's an enormously blunt tool. It means no American firms can sell anything to Huawei, including things like Android operating system for phones, which really isn't a national security concern. So I do think it's good that they're rolling back that decision somewhat, but being tough up front and rolling it back ultimately isn't the right thing for us to do. We look like a paper tiger.
Anja, and Beijing doesn't seem to be backing away from their core demand that has been lifting the existing tariffs on their products. President Trump has used tariffs as a huge weapon for the administration. What are the political risks if he did go ahead and try to lift them?
Yeah, I think the risks for him politically are bigger if he keeps the tariffs on, because, of course, they're mostly harming those who are his core base, the farmers in the Midwest who are suffering more farm bankruptcies than you've had ever since the 1980s in the United States. So far, that political constituency seems to be holding still and still supporting the president, but it's unclear how much longer that lasts, which is why you see so much focus in this phase one deal about lifting those agricultural tariffs and raising the amount of agricultural products China buys from us.
How does the momentum and the tone of these negotiations potentially change as we get closer to, the political fervour in the US going into the next election? And does this really complicate or kind of put out the idea that after phase one, we're going to see phase two, because by then all of the low-hanging fruit would have been well and truly dealt with?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate. These days, no one can predict anything about our U.S. elections. All I would say is when I travel to Washington and see senior political leaders, the Democrats, especially the far-left Democrats, are as tough on China as President Trump. So in a strange way, the one unifying theme in Washington is let's be tough on China. And so no matter who wins next fall, the election is about a year away, I think you'll have the broad outlines of this policy continuing.
All right, Anja, really appreciate your time as always. Anja Manuel, co-founder of consulting firm Rice Hadley Gates, joining us.
Thank you.